called a miracle voice, but to her, it was a curse sung in perfect pitch. There were no spotlights in the room where Whitney first learned to sing, just a worn-out church bench, a gospel book frayed at the edges, and a mother who didn't tolerate imperfection. The walls of her childhood weren't painted with dreams. They were papered with expectations. And every note she sang wasn't just music. It was a test of obedience, of faith, of control. Whitney didn't sing for joy. Not at first. She sang because someone was always listening. Her mother, Sissy, a gospel legend in her own right, stood over her shoulder with the severity of a drill sergeant and the holy authority of a preacher. If you're going to sing, she'd say, you're going to sing it right. And right didn't mean soulful. Right meant flawless. Right meant no cracks in the voice, no slips of emotion, no gasp for your own air. It meant your breath is borrowed. Your voice is borrowed. You belong to the song. The first time Whitney hit a high note and trembled, her mother slapped her hand, not out of cruelty, but fear that the world outside wouldn't forgive anything less than perfect. And so the voice grew, not like a wildflower, but like ivy climbing the walls it was planted near, always seeking approval, sunlight, or just space to breathe. No one noticed when she stopped humming to herself. No one noticed when she began practicing in silence, mouthing the words but not letting them out, as if even her own soul wasn't allowed to hear her voice, unless it had been measured and rehearsed. She was a child, but every time she sang, people saw a star, and every time someone said, she's going to be the next big thing. A part of Whitney whispered, but what if I don't want to be anything at all? By the time she was 11, she knew how to smile for people, a precise, delicate curve of the lips, designed not to express feeling, but to avoid questions. No one asked if she was tired. They only asked, can she sing that song again? And she did, always, because saying no was not in the script. For a girl whose every song was a ticket out of somewhere, out of poverty, out of Newark, out of her mother's shadow, even out of her own skin. But what no one told her was, the higher the note, the less oxygen you have left for yourself. Whitney's voice was not born free. It was born inside a cage, lined with velvet and draped in applause. But a cage is a cage, and velvet doesn't change the fact that sometimes the bars are made of your own talent. Fame gave her a stage, but no one asked if her heart was ready to stand on it. The first time Whitney stepped into a real studio, she was 16, her hands trembling under oversized headphones, eyes darting from the control room to the blinking red light above the mic. It was supposed to be a moment of arrival. Instead, it felt like a slow disappearance. The room was quiet, too quiet, not like the church, not like home. There were no amens in this place, no hallelujahs or clapping grannies, just producers staring through glass, waiting for her to perform like a product. They hadn't even unwrapped yet, and when she opened her mouth, the voice came out, flawless, haunting, beautiful. But something inside her stayed behind. Clive Davis called her the voice, a marketing miracle, a once-in-a-century talent. She was signed, polished, marketed like a crown jewel, a perfect blend of innocence, beauty, and God-given power. She was made to look like a dream, and maybe that was the beginning of the nightmare, because Whitney, the girl, was slowly being replaced by Whitney, the product. Her songs topped every chart. The world played her music at weddings, at funerals, in clubs, in churches. Her voice became a global ritual, played so often that people forgot. There was a woman behind it, a woman still unsure of herself, still caught between pleasing her mother, obeying the industry, and desperately wondering if anyone would ever love her. When the music stopped, at 22, she could barely walk through an airport without being mobbed. But in her hotel rooms, she still called her mother just to ask if she had sung okay on TV, because the applause of millions never quite replaced the silence. Her mother gave when Whitney needed comfort instead of critique. And then came Bobby. Bobby Brown wasn't just a man. He was a rebellion, a messy, volatile, unapologetic storm that ripped through the scripted perfection of her public life, where the world wanted Whitney to stay a polished statue. Bobby made her laugh like a teenager, curse like a rebel, feel like a woman, not a product. It was toxic. It was wild. It was, in her own words, the first time I ever felt alive and unafraid. But the industry hated it because Whitney was their princess and Bobby was street. And suddenly, the same media that once praised her voice began dissecting her life, what she wore, how thin she looked, how black she sounded now, whether she had lost her way. But no one thought to ask, did she ever get to choose her way to begin with? She kept singing, but something was different. The smile on her album covers started looking more like a mask. The eyes in her interviews started blinking slower, like they were searching for exits. And the voice, that miracle voice, still soared, but it started to carry pain. You could hear it, beneath the vibrato, behind the pitch-perfect notes. A woman who was slowly drowning in the applause she was once told to crave. By the time she was 30, Whitney had won every award imaginable, but she had also lost herself in the process of becoming everyone else's dream. And every night, before the show, as the lights dimmed and the mic was placed in her hand, she'd whisper to herself, "Don't let them see you fall apart," because that's what the voice does. It sings, even when the soul behind it is screaming. She wasn't just losing herself. She was learning how to disappear beautifully. By the time Whitney turned 28, she had conquered the world, but in private, she couldn't conquer a single quiet moment without feeling like she was unraveling. Her voice still soared. Her album still sold. Her face still smiled on every red carpet. But her heart, her spirit, they were exhausted. Exhausted from being perfect. Exhausted from being packaged. Exhausted from being everyone's idea of a dream and no one's idea of a human. Backstage, she would laugh. In interviews, she'd sparkle. But when the cameras turned off, silence became unbearable. That's when the whispers in her head got louder. You're slipping. You're not enough. They're going to find out you're a mess. And so she reached for whatever would turn the volume down. The drugs didn't come like a storm. They came like a lullaby, a soft escape. The first hit didn't make her wild. It made her still. For the first time in years, the pressure stopped pressing. The noise stopped screaming. The expectations for a moment backed away. And in that silence, she finally felt like herself again. But it was a lie, a seductive, deadly lie. Because the more she needed the silence, the more she had to chase it. And soon, the high wasn't peace anymore. It was survival. Her relationship with Bobby spiraled. Their love, once electric, turned into an addiction of its own. Volatile, beautiful, destructive, they were fire meeting gasoline. Passion tangled with pain. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was screaming, but it was never still. Together, they felt like rebels against the industry, against the press, against the world. But in truth, they were mostly just against themselves. The media had a feast. Whitney looks tired. Whitney skipped rehearsal. Whitney's not hitting the notes anymore. Every photo became a scandal. Every whisper became a headline. Every tear became a punchline. And while they gossiped, while they speculated, while they judged, no one asked if she was okay. She wasn't. She was unraveling in slow motion, smiling in public, but disappearing in private. She'd lock herself in hotel bathrooms, turn the shower on to drown the noise, sit on the floor with makeup smeared, voice gone, heart aching, staring into the fogged-up mirror, unable to recognize the woman staring back. "Am I still Whitney?" she whispered once. Or just a ghost in a sequin dress? But she kept performing, because that's what professionals do. That's what icons do. That's what survivors do. No matter how hollow it felt, She walked on stage night after night, heels tight, mic trembling in her hand, heart hidden beneath designer gowns. And when the music started, she became the voice again, flawless, effortless, legendary, even when the soul behind the voice was screaming for help. One night, after a European tour, she collapsed backstage, dehydrated, overworked, underloved. They called it exhaustion. She called it relief, because for a brief second, she didn't have to smile, didn't have to sing, didn't have to pretend. She could just rest, even if it came wrapped in pain. That was the beginning of the turning point. The world thought Whitney was fading, but in reality, Whitney was beginning to see herself, not as a voice, not as a brand, not even as a mother or a wife, but as a woman who had been lost inside a machine built to celebrate her, but never protect her. She would try to fight back. She would try to rebuild. But the collapse, it was already underway. And beautiful things don't break quietly. The mirror didn't break. It simply showed her who she had become. She stood in the dressing room, surrounded by gowns that cost more than her childhood home. Stylists hovered, assistants whispered. Everyone prepared her to shine. But when they left the room, the silence roared louder than the crowd ever could. She stared at herself in the mirror. The eyeliner was perfect, the lipstick flawless, the hair a sculpture of show business. And yet, none of it looked like her. Smile, Whitney. Be the star. They're waiting. But that night, she didn't move. Not for 10 minutes. Not for 20. Because for the first time, she didn't know who was looking back. Her daughter Bobby Christina was growing up in the echo chamber of her mother's legend. Whitney loved her fiercely, but love can't always outrun chaos. One afternoon, Bobby asked a question that split her in two. "Mom, why are you always tired?" She smiled, hugged her daughter, and whispered something soft. But inside, a voice screamed, "Because being me is exhausting, baby." Motherhood made her human again. At least it tried. She would sit by Bobby's bedside, sing lullabies with a voice that once shook arenas, now trembling, tired, fragile. And as her daughter drifted to sleep, Whitney would look out the window and pray, not for more fame, not for more songs, not for forgiveness from the world, just for peace. But peace didn't come easy to a woman whose soul had been fed to the wolves for so long. The tabloids were merciless. Every bad photo became proof. Every missed note became a headline. One paper even wrote, "America's angel, now a shadow." They didn't see the rehearsals. They didn't see the effort. They didn't see the nights she stayed sober, fighting tooth and nail just to sing one clean note. She once sat at her kitchen table, late at night, scribbling words on the back of a napkin. It wasn't a song. It was a confession. "I'm tired of being famous. I just want to be free." No audience, no spotlight, just a quiet life. But for Whitney, quiet had become a fantasy. There were moments, brief, golden moments, when she fought her way back. A surprise performance here, a small church concert there. Audiences cried. She smiled. And for those few minutes, she wasn't the voice. She wasn't the story. She was just Whitney. But the comeback was always haunted by the past that clung to her shadow. Addiction wasn't a habit anymore. It was a language her body spoke in secret. She quit, then crash, rise, then stumble. She called it the loop. Every time I get up, something pulls me back. There was one night she sang at a private event. Only 50 people. No lights, no cameras. She took the mic with shaking hands. And she sang not to perform, but to survive. A gospel hymn, a cappella, just her voice, raw, cracked real. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence, tears, a collective breath that felt like a funeral and a resurrection all at once. Someone whispered, "That wasn't a song, that was a soul asking to be held." After the show, a janitor found her sitting alone on the stage, legs folded, mic still in hand. She looked up and smiled gently. "They only see the diva," she said, "but all I've ever wanted was to be heard." That night, she wrote in her journal, "If I leave tomorrow, let it be known I tried. I really tried." Not for her fans, not for her legacy, but for the little girl inside her who once sang in a church pew, believing her voice could save the world. And maybe, just maybe, it still could. Sometimes the greatest tragedy is not in the fall, but in rising, only to fall harder. It was 2009, and she was ready to fight. After years lost in headlines, silence, and blurred memories, Whitney stepped back into the studio, not because the world asked her to, but because she needed to know if the voice was still there. If she was still there, the industry buzzed. The tabloids were quiet for once, and the world tilted its head. Curious, skeptical, hopeful. Could she still sing? Could she still rise? When I Look to You dropped, it wasn't just an album. It was a declaration of war against the ghosts, against the doubts, against the damage. And for a moment, she won. The album soared. Audiences wept. Old fans returned. Young fans discovered. And Whitney stood in the center of it all, not as a pop icon, not as a broken diva trying to reclaim a crown, but as a woman singing for her life. But comebacks aren't magic spells. They don't erase pain. They only spotlight it. The tour began, and with it came the pressure, the cameras, the comparisons, the impossible expectations. Each city brought standing ovations, and rumors, cheers, and criticism, hugs from fans, and cold stares from the press. At first, she held up, smiling, thanking God, thanking her fans, laughing off the shaky notes, holding tightly to the songs that once saved her. But behind closed doors, the cracks deepened. Her voice, once liquid gold, was now scarred by years of wear, by pain, by smoke and silence. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't the same. And Whitney felt it. Every missed note, every flat breath, every look in the crowd that said, she used to be better. In one city, she broke down mid-song. Her eyes filled. Her voice trembled. The mic shook in her hands. The band kept playing. The lights kept shining. But Whitney, she stopped singing. She stood in silence, tears rolling down her face, as 10,000 people watched their icon bleed in real time. And when the song ended, the crowd didn't cheer. They cried because they knew they were witnessing something sacred. A fighter who wasn't hiding the bruises anymore. After the show, she locked herself in the hotel bathroom, sat on the tile floor, robe wrapped tight, hair pinned back, no makeup, no mirrors, just her and the silence. She whispered to herself, "You did it, girl. You got back up. Even if they don't see it, you showed up." The comeback wasn't perfect. It didn't fix everything. It didn't silence the critics. But for Whitney, it wasn't about them anymore. It was about reclaiming herself, her story, her strength. And yes, she stumbled. Yes, she struggled. Yes, the voice cracked. But her spirit, it roared. And that roar, even when drowned in addiction, even when muffled by pain, was undeniable. But behind the curtain, something darker stirred. The tour was grueling, her health fragile, her trust eroded, and the people around her, some cared, some didn't, some watched. None could stop the slow-motion collapse that was already unfolding. One night, after a show in Australia, she found herself alone on the hotel balcony, watching the ocean under a quiet sky. She lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, took a long drag, and whispered. They still loved the voice, but not the woman inside it. Then she flicked the ash into the wind and stood there for hours, letting the breeze remind her she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. In those final months, Whitney gave everything she had, to her daughter, to her songs, to the people who still believed. She smiled, she danced, She laughed louder than she had in years. But behind her eyes, there was always a quiet kind of goodbye. In her final studio session, she sang a gospel song, barefoot, eyes closed, arms outstretched like she was floating. The room fell silent. A producer would later say, "It didn't sound like she was performing. It sounded like she was praying." And maybe she was, because Whitney knew, even if the world still hoped, even if the comeback still shimmered, she was tired, not of singing, not of living, but of carrying the weight of being Whitney Houston. And sometimes, even the strongest voices need to rest. It wasn't the silence that hurt the most. It was realizing the world had stopped listening. The night before it all ended, she laughed, not the forced laugh of a woman pretending to be okay, but a real, belly-deep laugh that made everyone in the room pause. She was at a small gathering, close friends, industry folks, a few old musicians who had once toured the world by her side. The kind of night where the wine flows easy, and the stories get louder with each retelling. She told one about the time she forgot the lyrics on stage in Milan. Everyone laughed. She did too, but behind the joke was something else, something distant, something final, like a woman flipping through the last pages of her life and smiling because the beginning had been beautiful. Whitney wasn't fragile that night. She wasn't broken. She was glowing, dressed in a golden gown, hair perfectly done, eyes bright. To those around her, she looked like a queen ready for her encore. But inside, she had already heard her curtain call. In the hotel later that night, she took off her makeup slowly, one swipe at a time. She stared at her reflection, not with sadness, not with regret, but with peace. "I did the best I could," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. And sometimes that has to be enough. At 3:22 a.m., she wrote one last message on a napkin beside her bed. "Tell Bobby I love her louder than music." The next morning, she was gone. News spread like fire. The world froze. Television stopped mid-program. Headlines exploded. Social media collapsed into a shared scream of disbelief. Whitney Houston, dead at 48. 3 words, 12 syllables. A universe ending. Fans gathered outside her hotel. Some held candles. Some sang, "I will always love you," until their voices cracked. Others just cried because they didn't know what else to do. In the hours that followed, the world reassembled its memory of her, piece by piece. Video clips, award speeches, gospel performances, home videos, old interviews where her laugh could brighten the city. But there was one clip that went viral. Whitney on stage, arms open, eyes closed, singing, "I Look to You," as if it were the last thing she'd ever say. Millions watched it, not as entertainment, as testimony. Bobby Brown arrived later that day. Silent, broken, Bobby Christina collapsed into herself. No words, just sobs that didn't sound like a child mourning a mother, but like a child mourning the sky itself. The funeral was held in her childhood church. Hundreds attended. Thousands waited outside. Millions watched live. Stevie Wonder sang. Kevin Costner gave a eulogy that silenced the world. But the loudest voice was the silence between every song, the aching quiet of a world learning how to exist without the voice that had once held it together. That night, a radio DJ in New York played nothing but Whitney tracks for 6 hours straight. No ads, no commentary, just song after song, voice after voice, a symphony of memory. At 3 a.m., he said one line, "She didn't die, she just went home." Whitney's story didn't end in a bathtub. It didn't end in headlines. It ended in the spaces she left behind. The mothers who sang her songs to their daughters. The singers who built their voices in her echo. The girl in Newark who once believed a dream could reach the stars. And did. Even now, when a high note breaks through a quiet room, when a gospel choir swells, when someone sings from the soul and not the throat, she is there, not in body, but in every note that dares to be honest. And maybe that's what legends really are. Not perfect, not eternal, but brave enough to burn bright, even if it means burning out. Some voices fade after death. Hers only got louder. She was gone, but in some ways, Whitney never really left. Because something strange happened after her funeral. The world refused to let go. The streaming numbers didn't just rise, they exploded. Her albums climbed back up the charts like they were released yesterday. Teenagers who were toddlers during her prime suddenly sang her lyrics like they'd grown up with them. Clips of her interviews, her laughter, her heartbreak flooded the internet like digital memorials. She became not just a singer, but a movement, a question, a mirror, and perhaps a warning. Documentaries came. Some tried to honor her. Others tried to dissect her, to pull apart the woman from the myth, the star from the scars. But they all circled the same truth. You cannot understand American music without her voice. Meanwhile, inside recording studios, young artists kept saying the same name, Whitney. She became the blueprint, not just for how to sing, but how to feel. She had made emotion fashionable, pain divine, perfection obsolete. Then came the Broadway play, the biopic, the remastered vinyls, the unreleased demos. The tributes poured in from Beyoncé, Adele, Lady Gaga, Jennifer Hudson, each one bowing to the woman who paved the road they now walked. But not all tributes came with microphones. Some came quietly, like a mother playing Greatest Love of All while combing her daughter's hair, or a lonely man dancing alone in his kitchen to How Will I Know, or a nurse singing I Will Always Love You to an elderly patient during their final days. That's the thing about true legacy. It doesn't perform. It heals. Years passed, and still, every time someone dared to belt a ballad, to soar into a note not meant for mortals, Whitney's shadow hovered, not as a critic, but as a guide. But legacy is not just about glory. It's also about the ghosts you leave behind. Bobby Christina struggled, haunted by the weight of her mother's voice, her absence, the endless media obsession. People said she looked like Whitney, moved like her, cried like her, but inside, she was a girl still trying to be seen as herself. Her life became a slow echo of her mother's. The same headlines, the same substances, the same tragic bathtub. When she passed in 2015, it felt like the world was watching the same film. Only this time, they knew how it ended. At her funeral, someone whispered, it's like the universe couldn't bear to keep them apart. And yet, Whitney's legacy endured, not because she was perfect, but because she was human, loudly, beautifully, tragically human. One day, a girl from Atlanta uploaded a TikTok. She was singing Run to You, raw, unfiltered, tears falling as she hit the chorus. The video went viral, not because she nailed the note, but because she didn't. Because in that trembling voice, people heard Whitney, not the flawless diva, but the woman who once said, I'm every woman, even the broken ones. Whitney's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was long overdue. Her sister accepted the honor. Her fans sang outside the building. And inside, the screen flashed one final quote. With every note I sang, I was trying to survive. She became more than music. She became myth, muse, memory. And even now, when the lights dim and someone steps on stage with nothing but a mic and a prayer, she is there. You can feel her in gospel churches where grandmothers hum softly into the stained glass air, in backstage mirrors where rising stars pray for the strength to begin, in broken girls who close their eyes and whisper, let me sing like her just once. But Whitney never wanted worship. She wanted to be heard, not just as a voice, but as a woman who loved, who felt, who tried. And in that trying, she left behind something no scandal could erase. Truth. And the truth is, some voices don't die. They just become eternal. Before the world lost her voice, she gave us one last song, a song made of silence, sorrow, and the kind of love that never fades. There was no standing ovation, no fireworks, no farewell to her. When Whitney Houston left the stage forever, the world didn't know it was watching her final performance. But she did. It was a small stage, private, untelevised, just a rehearsal in a dimly lit room, days before she passed. She stood there alone, no backing singers, no crowd, just a piano and the weight of her own history. She sang, "Yes, Jesus Loves Me," slowly, gently, each word trembling like a goodbye wrapped in prayer. For the Bible tells me so. The pianist said later that she paused after the final note, closed her eyes, and whispered, "That might be the last time I sing." And it was. The footage surfaced months later, unedited, unpolished, and utterly devastating. Not because she looked broken, but because she looked ready. Like a woman who had finally made peace with a world that never gave her rest. When the video went viral, millions watched in silence. Not a single comment about her voice cracking or her body shrinking. Only one word repeated in the comment section over and over: "Thank you." Whitney's final days weren't glamorous. They were quiet, painful, real. A woman fighting to keep the light inside her from going out, even as the world turned away. But love never turned away from her. Not truly. And it came back in waves. In the tears of fans. In the candles lit outside churches. In the way strangers hugged at memorials as if they'd lost a sister. Because they had. She was everyone's sister. Everyone's daughter, everyone's voice. In Newark, where it all began, they renamed a street after her. But a street sign could never carry her weight, because Whitney Houston didn't belong to a block, or a city, or even a country. She belonged to every woman who ever dreamed while broken. At her final tribute concert, a hologram of Whitney took the stage. Some called it disrespectful. Others wept like it was resurrection. And maybe, for a moment, it was. She appeared in white, head lifted, arms outstretched. That voice, digitally resurrected, still strong enough to crack the sky. But the most powerful tribute didn't come from stage. It came from a child, a 7-year-old girl, standing in her living room, holding a hairbrush like a microphone, belting out, "I want to dance with somebody," with all the unfiltered joy in the world. No pitch, no polish, just heart. That was Whitney's legacy. Not fame, not awards, not tabloid headlines, but voice passed down, like a torch from soul to soul. There are stars who shine and fade, and there are those who explode, lighting up everything before they vanish. Whitney was the latter, and in that explosion, she left behind pieces of herself. In songs, in stories, in strangers' hearts. Her mother, Sissy Houston, once said, "I gave the world my baby. I just hope it was worth it." And maybe the world didn't deserve her, but God gave her anyway. For 48 years, the heavens loaned us a voice too powerful for earth. So when the final track ends, when the applause fades, when the silence wraps the room like a prayer, know this: she didn't leave. She just changed frequencies. And if you listen, not with your ears, but with your spirit, you'll still hear her in gospel choirs, in the tremble of heartbreak, in the joy of every girl who dares to sing, even when the world tells her not to, because Whitney Houston is not gone. She has simply become a note that never stops echoing. If the story touched you, if Whitney's voice brought back a memory, a tear, or a moment you thought you'd forgotten, then you already know some stories are too powerful to be left in silence. Here on Silent Stories, we don't just tell tales. We honor the voices that change the world and the ones the world tried to forget. So if you believe in the power of storytelling, raw, real, and unapologetically human, then join us. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because the next story might just be the one you need to hear. And remember, every legend was once just a whisper. Let's keep their voices alive. Together,